Welcome to the deep dive. We take your sources, unpack them, and pull out the key insights for you. Today, we're looking at Spain, specifically its incredible, really dramatic journey from decades of dictatorship under Franco to becoming a modern democracy. It's quite a story. High stakes, big personalities, lots of twists and turns.
Absolutely. And our focus for this deep dive is the reign of King Juan Carlos VI. So that's from 1975 when he took the throne, right up until he stepped down in 2014. We're going to dig into the key moments, the huge challenges Spain navigated, and pull out the core ideas from the sources you sent us about this whole period.
Okay, let's set the scene. It's November 20th, 1975. Franco, the dictator, he's finally dead after almost 40 years. 2 days later, November 22nd, Juan Carlos becomes king. But, well, not everyone was throwing confetti, were they? There was a lot of skepticism.
Oh, definitely. Deep skepticism. Our sources point to Santiago Correa, the old communist leader. He famously told an Italian journalist that Juan Carlos was just, and I'm quoting here, a mere puppet, a poor incapable without dignity or political sense, engaged up to his neck in an adventure that will cost him dearly. Quite the prediction.
Wow. Yeah, so we'll definitely explore how right, or maybe how wrong, that turned out to be. So the start of his reign, it felt ambiguous. He actually reappointed Franco's last prime minister, Arias Navarro.
He did. Navarro had been PM since '73. And yeah, keeping him on seemed like a nod to the old guard, the Francoist bunker, as they called it. It definitely made people nervous, those hoping for real change.
But it wasn't all backward looking, was it? There was Fraga Iribarren, seen as more of a modernist, back as interior minister.
Right, Fraga. He promised modernization, political reform within 2 years. But at the same time, his ministry cracked down hard on Basque demonstrations. So very mixed signals. Seems Juan Carlos was trying to, well, reassure the old guard while maybe planning something else. People genuinely feared another civil war. Interestingly, the king launched this big alert system, Operation Lucero.
What happened?
Nothing. The streets were calm. Which kind of suggests the public mood wasn't for conflict, but maybe just stability, a quiet path forward.
And what about the outside world? The international reaction must have mattered.
Hugely. The sources highlight the French president, Giscard d'Estaing, and the German president, Walter Scheel, attending the enthronement. This wasn't just protocol, it was a massive diplomatic signal, hinting Spain could eventually join the European Economic Community, the CEE. In fact, Giscard's presence was apparently dependent on Pinochet, the Chilean dictator, not being there.
So that international backing gave him some cover, maybe, some legitimacy for what came next.
Exactly. It gave him crucial space. And then he made his move. July 1976, he asks Arias Navarro to resign, and he appoints Adolfo Suarez. Younger guy, came up through the Francoist movement, but ready for change.
Suarez, okay, so this is where the opening without rupture strategy really kicks in, right? Reform, but carefully. Avoid another war.
Precisely. And Suarez moved fast. July 76, bang, a huge amnesty, though some terrorist prisoners had to wait until 77. Then he pushes for this law for political reform, basically setting up an elected parliament, the Cortes, based on popular sovereignty. It passed a referendum in December 76 with overwhelming support. Incredible speed, really.
How did he manage that, dismantling the old system so fast without, provoking a massive backlash from the Francoists?
Boldness, partly, and I think a clever strategy. He systematically dismantled the Franco structures, dissolved the old Cortes, started legalizing political parties, even, amazingly, the Communist Party, the PCE, in April 77.
Not the Communist Party. That must have been hugely controversial.
It was. But Santiago Correa, their leader, had shifted to a more Euro-communist stance, distancing himself from Moscow. That helped make it, well, slightly more palatable. And alongside this, by spring 77, basic rights were being recognized. Right to strike, free expression, unions. Plus, to sort of seal the deal, Juan Carlos's own father, the Count of Barcelona, formally gave up his claim to the throne in May 77.
So all this groundwork leads to the first proper democratic elections, June 1977.
That's it. Suarez's party, the UCD, Union of the Democratic Center, gets 35%. Felipe González's Socialists, the PSOE, get 29%. And that elected body then drafts the 1978 Constitution, ratified by referendum that December.
And the Constitution itself, what were the key points?
It defines Spain as a state of law, social and democratic. Big emphasis on liberty, justice, equality, pluralism. And crucially, it positioned Juan Carlos as king because he was the legitimate heir of the historical dynasty, the Bourbons. Not because Franco picked him. A massive shift in legitimacy. It also paved the way for a regional autonomy Basque country. Catalonia got statutes in '79, and then later a law harmonized things, so all regions became autonomous communities. Spain was becoming decentralized.
Okay, so huge progress. But you mentioned fault lines earlier. Things weren't perfectly smooth. What led to Suarez actually resigning?
Yeah, even with all that success, his own party, the UCD, was tearing itself apart. Internal fights over things like legalizing divorce, funding for religious schools, the usual progressive versus conservative battles. He was caught in the middle. He resigned in January 1981, and then just weeks later, February 23rd, 1981, the big one. Spain's democracy faced its absolute biggest test.
The coup attempt. Tejero storming the parliament, tanks in Valencia. This must have felt like everything was about to collapse.
Absolutely terrifying. All that careful work since '75, suddenly hanging by a thread. And this is where Juan Carlos, the man Carrillo called a puppet, really stepped up.
What did he do exactly?
From the Zarzuela Palace, he got on television. Importantly, he wore his military uniform as Captain General of the Armed Forces. He condemned the coup in no uncertain terms. He spent hours on the phone calling military leaders, telling them to uphold the Constitution. He even sent a telex to General Milans del Bosch, the one with the tanks in Valencia, swearing he wouldn't abdicate or flee. Real personal courage there.
And it worked. The coup collapsed.
It did, and the impact was immense. It massively boosted the legitimacy of the Constitution, of democracy itself. Political forces who rallied around the king, even Felipe Gonzalez, the socialist leader who'd been so critical, later said, "We were wrong about him."
That single act really won Juan Carlos the loyalty, the affection of most Spaniards. He became the symbol, the guarantor of their democracy.
Okay, so the coup fails, democracy holds. Spain moves into a new phase. The socialist years, as our outline calls them. Right. The UCD basically fell apart after the coup attempt and Suarez's resignation. Snap elections in October '82. And a huge win for the socialists, the PSOE. An absolute majority, 45% of the vote. Felipe Gonzalez becomes prime minister, and he stays there until 1996. A long run.
And what defined the Gonzalez era?
Modernization was a big theme. New political leaders came in. They tackled industrial restructuring to deal with the economic fallout from the oil shocks of the '70s, and a huge symbolic and practical step. January 1st, 1986, Spain joins the European Economic Community, the CEE, something Franco could only dream of.
Right, joining Europe, that must have felt like a massive validation.
Totally. And Spain started to, show itself off. 1992 was the big year, the World Expo in Seville, the Olympics in Barcelona, projecting this image of a dynamic, modern country. Barcelona trying to become a tech hub for the Mediterranean.
But domestically, were things smooth? You mentioned industrial restructuring.
Not entirely smooth, no. The government modernized the state apparatus, brought in a proper income tax system, tried to streamline the state-owned industries left over from Franco's time, this policy of dirigism. But unemployment remained stubbornly high. It peaked at 22% in 1985. That's huge. Led to worker discontent, a big general strike in December '88. Even the main socialist union, the UGT, broke ties with the PSOE government. So tension between modernizing and keeping the working class on side.
And the political right wasn't just sitting quietly, I assume.
No. Manuel Fraga, remember him from the early days, he rebranded his party, the Alliance Popular, into the Partido Popular, the PP, in 1989. And a young Jose Maria Aznar started making a name for himself within the PP. The seeds of the future opposition were being sown.
Then came the 90s, Maastricht. More economic pressure.
Definitely. The Maastricht Treaty of '91 laid out strict rules for countries wanting to join the new single currency, the euro. Spain had to meet those criteria. So Gonzalez, as the economy minister, Carlos Solchaga, brought in more austerity in May '92. The decretazo, they called it. Spending cuts, lower unemployment benefits, salary freezes for civil servants, tough medicine.
And the economy suffered.
It did. Banks selling assets, El País newspaper reporting 1,200 jobs lost per day. Pretty grim. And on top of the economic pain, the PSOE government got hit by corruption scandals.
Ah, yes. The Ibercorp affair. And Falesa.
Right. Ibercorp involved insider trading allegations reaching the Bank of Spain governor. Falesa was about shell companies allegedly funneling illegal campaign money to the PSOE. It caused major splits within the Socialist Party itself.
And there was something else, too, the GAL affair.
Yes, the GAL. The anti-terrorist liberation groups, basically state-sponsored death squads targeting ETA activists, often across the border in France. Gonzalez's government was heavily implicated. Ministers were eventually convicted, and later investigations, according to the sources, pointed to Gonzalez himself as being ultimately responsible, a very dark shadow.
So, economic hardship, major corruption scandals, the GAL affair. Sounds like they were heading for defeat in the next election.
You'd think so, but amazingly, Gonzalez and the PSOE won again in the snap elections of 1993. Only 38.6% this time needed alliances with Catalan and Basque nationalist parties to govern, but they clung on. It's quite remarkable, really. Maybe voters felt there wasn't a credible alternative yet, or perhaps González still retained some personal popularity despite it all.
Incredible. Okay, so that brings us towards the mid-90s. A new political dynamic emerges, what the sources call a new political turno, a sort of alternation in power, and the beginning of the king's decline.
Yeah, the tide finally turned. José María Aznar, the PP leader, who, interestingly, survived a big ETA car bomb attack in '95 thanks to his armored car, led the PP to a narrow victory in March 1996. Aznar did a very effective job of changing his image. He came from a background linked to the Franco regime, but he presented himself as a modern, responsible, center-right leader.
And his government's priorities, 1996 to 2004.
Top priority, get Spain into the euro. Meet those Maastricht criteria, which meant more austerity, cuts to public spending, research, social benefits, but also policies promoting labor flexibility. This did create about 2 million jobs, but the sources note many were precarious, insecure jobs. Led to another general strike in 2002.
This sounds like that trickle-down idea the source mentions, influenced by the Chicago School of Economics.
Exactly. A real belief in market liberalization, reducing the state's role, hoping wealth creation at the top would eventually benefit everyone. A big shift from the previous socialist approach. Alongside the economy, Aznar focused heavily on fighting ETA. He made a pact for liberties and against terrorism with the opposition PSOE. And in 2002, they passed the controversial Ley de Partidos, the party law. This allowed them to ban parties like the Basque separatist party Batasuna and shut down newspapers like Egan if they didn't explicitly condemn ETA violence.
Did that work against ETA?
It certainly increased pressure and isolated ETA politically. It also predictably provoked more ETA attacks, but it did galvanize huge public demonstrations against ETA across Spain, so a complex impact.
Aznar's foreign policy was also quite distinct, wasn't it?
Very. He aligned Spain very closely with George W. Bush Jr. Most controversially, he strongly supported the 2003 Iraq War, despite massive protests against it within Spain itself. There were other things too, whispers about plots against Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, a minor spat with Morocco over the tiny Parachel islet, a much more assertive U.S.-aligned foreign policy.
And then, March 11th, 2004.
Yeah, a date etched into Spain's memory, just 3 days before the general election. Horrific coordinated bombings on commuter trains in Madrid, 191 people killed, Islamist terrorism.
The political fallout was immediate and devastating for the government.
It was catastrophic for the PP. Mariano Rajoy, who was Aznar's chosen successor and the interior minister at the time, instantly and wrongly blamed ETA. The government pushed this narrative hard, even allegedly pressuring newspapers. But evidence quickly pointed to Islamist extremists linked to al-Qaeda. The public felt deliberately misled, especially given the context of the unpopular Iraq War. The handling of the aftermath created enormous anger.
So the election result was a direct consequence.
Absolutely. April 18, 2004. José Luis Zapatero, the new PSOE leader, wins. A victory fueled by outrage over the bombing response to the Iraq War, but also other lingering issues like the government's handling of the Prestige oil spill disaster off the coast of Galicia. It showed how a major crisis, badly handled, can completely change the political weather.
Zapatero. So the socialists are back. What was his agenda? The sources call it social and memorial.
Yeah, he moved quickly on several fronts, pulled Spanish troops out of Iraq almost immediately, legalized gay marriage, which is a big social change for Spain. He regularized hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants, reduced the Catholic Church's influence in schools, and even tried negotiating with ETA again, although ETA kept up attacks.
And the memorial part, that sounds potentially tricky.
It was. Zapatero championed policies focused on historical memory. This meant compensating victims of the Civil War and the Franco dictatorship on the Republican side. It led to the removal of Franco statues from public spaces and support for exhuming mass graves from the Civil War era. But this was deeply divisive. For many Spaniards, it felt like reopening old wounds, stirring up a past they preferred to leave buried. It highlighted just how difficult national reconciliation can be.
And internationally.
Spain voted overwhelmingly to approve the proposed European Constitution in a 2005 referendum, though that constitution eventually failed elsewhere. Zapatero also partnered with Turkey to propose the UN Alliance of Civilizations, trying to bridge gaps between Western and Muslim countries. A definite shift away from Aznar's approach. Relations with the U.S. cooled significantly while he focused more on ties with Latin America and North Africa.
But then, like González before him, Zapatero ran into economic headwinds. The 2008 global financial crisis.
Yes, Spain got hit very hard. The bursting of a massive property bubble played a big role. And with the EU having expanded eastward, Spain wasn't quite the low-cost destination for investment it once was. So Zapatero, despite his social agenda, found himself forced to implement, you guessed it, austerity. Raising the retirement age, cutting public sector pay, emergency public works programs. The economic crisis really defined the latter part of his time in office.
Which leads us back to the PP and Mariano Rajoy.
Exactly. The 2011 election saw another blue wave. Rajoy's PP won a landslide. Zapatero seemed exhausted, and maybe the country, grappling with the crisis, found his social reforms, as the source puts it, exasperating in that context. Rajoy inherited a terrible situation. Unemployment was back up over 21%.
And his response? More austerity.
Pretty much the textbook response at the time across Europe. Severe spending cuts, more public sector freezes, tax increases, cuts to Social Security. He also tried to roll back abortion rights, making them much more restrictive. But massive public protests forced him to withdraw that plan in 2014. And of course, he faced the escalating Catalan independence movement, eventually leading to him dissolving the Catalan parliament in 2017 after their independence referendum.
And amidst all this, the king steps down.
Yes. June 2nd, 2014, Juan Carlos abdicates in favor of his son, Felipe VI, the end of a nearly 40-year reign. But the story doesn't quite end there, does it? The sources paint a rather sad picture of his later years.
Yeah, the sad destiny, as they call it, the hero of the transition, but then revelations of a double life.
Exactly. Accusations surfaced about illegal money, kickbacks, funds hidden away in tax havens, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, often brought to light by former mistresses. It tarnished his image significantly. And in 2020, he left Spain altogether, going into self-imposed exile in Abu Dhabi. Queen Sofia remained in Spain, a really stark contrast to the man who faced down the coup plotters in 1981.
So, wrapping this up, it's an incredible arc we've traced. Juan Carlos starts as this figure of doubt, maybe Franco's puppet.
Becomes the architect, the guarantor of a peaceful democratic transition, the hero of 23F, the coup attempt.
Only for that second Spanish miracle to be followed by decades of tough politics, economic booms and busts, and then this personal fall from grace ending in exile.
It really highlights the paradox of leadership, doesn't it? How someone can be so pivotal, so necessary at one point in history, and yet their later actions or revelations about their past actions can completely reshape their legacy. It's complex, often contradictory.
And for you listening, this deep dive shows just how fast a nation can change, but also how the challenges economic, social, regional persist even after achieving something huge like democracy. It makes you think about the long shadow leaders cast, doesn't it? How those early triumphs can sit alongside later failings.
Yeah. And maybe a final thought to leave you with, building on that idea of historical memory that Zapatero tried to address. Consider that delicate balance, the balance between national reconciliation trying to move forward together and historical reckoning confronting the difficult, painful parts of the past. What does Spain's journey from Franco's death through all these ups and downs tell us about how societies grapple with trauma while trying to build a shared future? And why do those struggles seem to keep resurfacing, even decades on, something to mull over?